Crowds test more than just public order. They test judgment, they test empathy, they test institutional ethics. Let's find out. In GS IV Ethics, when it comes to case studies, crowd scenarios appear in many forms. A protest turning tense, a festival becoming a stampede, a silent vigil watched by drones, a bureaucrat caught between orders and conscience. But here's the problem. Most aspirants treat crowd cases like law and order drills. They talk about barricades, they talk about sections, they talk about numbers, they talk about enforcement protocols. What they miss is the moral complexity underneath it. Before we start understanding case studies about crowd, let's look at how academicians saw crowd. In 1895, Gustave Le Bon described crowds as irrational, emotional, and prone to violence, while sociologist Durkheim feared that crowds dissolved individual responsibility, that in a crowd people forget they are moral agents. And even today, news headlines often reinforce that fear. News headlines say mob on rampage, crowds go out of control, authorities forced to act. But not everyone agrees. Some recent modern scholars like John Drury and Clifford Stott offer a very different view about crowd. They argue that crowds don't become violent by nature. They become violent when they feel unheard, cornered, or disrespected. That's why in Ethics GS paper, crowd scenarios are never about crowd control. They're about moral restraint. They're about ethical planning. They're about public trust and the invisible test of who we become when everyone is watching or when no one is watching. So in this episode, we'll do three things. First, decode the 7 moral dilemmas crowds reveal. Then I'll walk you through step by step about how to resolve ethics crowd-related case studies. And finally, solve real case studies that UPSC loves to ask. Crowds may look like chaos, but for a civil servant, they're a moral exam. Loud, unpredictable, and televised. In UPSC GS IV papers also, crowd scenarios may seem very routine, a protest, a religious gathering, a traffic blockade. But look closer, each of them hides a moral crossroad. Let's decode the 7 ethical dilemmas you're likely to face, not in a textbook, but in the thick of noise, pressure, and public gaze. The first common dilemma is the choice between legality and morality. Imagine a peaceful rally is underway. Technically, it violates Section 144. You get orders, arrest the organizers, but you ask yourself, will arresting them ease the tension or explode it? This is a classic clash. Do you follow the rule book or your conscience? In crowd situations, the law is your guide, but morality is your test. That's the first dilemma, morality versus legality. The next dilemma is between force and restraint. Picture this. A crowd blocks the highway. Tempers rise. Some officers whisper, use tear gas. But then you spot children, elderly women, a father holding a sleeping child. So now what? This is the restraint dilemma, because sometimes doing less takes more strength. The next crowd dilemma is an interesting one. It's between safety and dignity. Security briefing says, frisk everyone. It's a religious festival. Thousands are entering. You're told, be aggressive, be thorough. But you hesitate. Will this violate their faith? Will this humiliate the elders? This is not just a security drill. It's a dignity test. Ethics lives in the gray between safety and sensitivity. That's the next dilemma. The next dilemma is to control or to communicate. There is an unrest. The default response, clamp down, impose Section 144. But local leaders urge dialogue, mediation, de-escalation. Now the question is, do you command from above or you listen from the ground? This is a choice between authority and legitimacy, because sometimes crowd don't need control, they need to be heard. So the next dilemma is control or communicate. Next step is a dilemma between intention and outcomes. You install barricades to keep the crowd safe, but panic spreads. Those same barricades, now they are traps. People are hurt. You meant well, but things went wrong. This is a bitter truth in ethics. It's not just what you intended, it's what actually happened. And intentions versus outcomes is a big dilemma in a crowd situation. The next is the issue of individual accountability in collective chaos. There's a protest, suddenly violence, stones fly, fires start. You didn't order this, but you were in charge. Now what? Can you claim neutrality? Can you hide behind "it wasn't me"? No, you cannot. In crowd chaos, responsibility may blur, but it never disappears. The last dilemma is between transparency and tactical secrecy. You're using facial recognition, tracking real-time crowd behavior. It's smart, it's efficient. But no one was informed. No consent, no public disclosure. Should you be transparent or protect the plan? This is the final dilemma between ethics and expedience. Because what's ethical isn't always easy, and what's easy isn't always right. Now that we have understood the 7 dilemmas, in the next segment we show you how to resolve them, not with force but with frameworks. Spotting the dilemma is only half the job. The real test is knowing what to do next and why. When a protest turns tense, when a celebration becomes a stampede, you need more than rules. You need an ethical compass. So here's your guide. 6 powerful ethical frameworks, each offering a different lens to see the crowd and to see yourself. First up, consequentialism, also known as utilitarianism. Ask yourself, will this action lead to the greatest good for the greatest number? So, if dispersing a crowd prevents injuries, it might be justified, even if it's unpopular. But beware, if that act causes panic, fear, or stampede, it fails both morally and practically. The ethical takeaway here is intent must be wise, impact must be just. Next, Kant. He doesn't ask you about outcomes, he asks, are you treating the people as ends in themselves, not as means to your goal? So protesters aren't obstacles. Pilgrims aren't statistics. They are citizens with dignity. Profiling someone because of how they look or believe violates the dignity. Kant reminds us, in crowd control, humanity comes first. Third is Aristotle and his big idea of phronesis, that's practical wisdom. When the rule book falls short, when time is short, it's your character that leads. A wise officer knows force is easy, restraint is strength, courage, calm, justice. That's the moral armor you wear. In crowd ethics, be more than right, be wise. Bauman gives us a chilling insight. In crowds, morality often vanishes. People follow others, officers follow orders, and no one pauses to ask, is this right? Bauman says someone must break that spell. Someone must choose ethics over indifference. In the middle of chaos, stopping to help an injured protester, it's not just duty, it's moral leadership. Now let's bring in Mahatma Gandhi. He believed how you act is more important than what you achieve. Crowd safety is the goal, yes, but violence, humiliation or deceit, those are unethical means. So don't just reach your goal, reach it ethically. Remember, moral courage must work hand in hand with ethical restraint. Finally, Martha Nussbaum. She argues emotions aren't weaknesses, they are moral tools. In crowd management, recognizing fear, calming anxiety, showing respect is not soft, it's ethical intelligence. Speak to the crowd, don't shout. Understand the fear, don't suppress it. Nussbaum teaches us compassion is not a compromise, it's valuing humans. So resolving a crowd dilemma isn't about finding a loophole, It's about choosing clarity over chaos, character over command, compassion over coldness. Because when the crowd swells, what's being tested is not just about your crowd control plan, it's your principles. So you've spotted the dilemma, you thought through the ethics, but here comes the real test. How do you write an answer that's structured, ethical, and UPSC worthy? Introducing a framework designed exactly for this: simple, powerful, and foolproof. It's called safety method. S stands for stakeholders. First, identify who's affected and how. Don't stop at police versus protesters. Just zoom out. Just observe. Are there children in the crowd? Are emergency workers able to access a scene? What about local shopkeepers, the media, even the bystanders who are watching online? And yes, future citizens, because your action sets a precedent. Ethics begins with inclusion, and inclusion begins by seeing everyone. A is for assessment. Next, diagnose the situation. Not just what's happening, but why it's happening. Is the crowd angry or just afraid? Did something trigger mistrust? Was there a poor planning, rumors, religious tension? Frame it like this: the immediate risk is escalation, but the deeper issue is exclusion, miscommunication, and loss of trust. When you understand the root, you respond with reason, not reflex. F stands for frame it ethically. Now it's the time to put your ethics lens on. Ask yourself, what values are being tested here? Is justice being upheld? Is empathy visible in your actions? Are you accountable or hiding behind protocol? Is dignity being preserved or sacrificed for efficiency? In exam, use lines like this. As Nussbaum reminds us, governance must feel emotionally real, not cold. On the other side, you can also use Bauman. As Bauman warns us, crowd pressure blurs responsibility. Ethics must restore it. This section is your ethical soul. Make it visible. This is where you get your marks in your exam. E stands for evaluate options. Now lay out your choices. Show that you have thought through the consequences. Should you engage in a dialogue? Should you observe silently? Should you invoke your legal powers or use force if all else fails? But don't stop at action in writing answers. Assess the morality of each option. In your exam, use lines like this. Invoking Aristotle's phronesis, I would balance firmness with restraint. Following the principle of minimum harm, negotiation must be prioritized over coercion. This is how you write your answers. Why? Because UPSC wants reflection, not reaction. D stands for decide and justify. Finally, take a stand and explain why it's ethical. Don't sit on the fence. Pick a path and defend it with values. For example, this is how you write your answer. I would initiate dialogue, verify facts, appeal for calm through trusted community leaders. Force would be the last resort, governed by restraint and proportionality. This honors both constitutional duty and moral responsibility. Always remember to end strong. Let your ethical compass shine. This safety framework isn't a trick, it's a tool to show that in middle of crisis, you can still act with clarity and conscience. Because in crowd cases, you're not just writing policy, you're writing public memory. Now let's apply this framework in a farmer's case study. The farmers' protest starts peacefully. The farmers have been protesting for their rights, fair procurement prices, promised subsidies. The protest is authorized. It's day 4, and the mood on the ground, tense but controlled. But then more people arrive. The crowd swells. Slogans grow louder, and then a rumor breaks through. The protest leaders have been detained. Emotion flips. People push forward. They press against the barricades. Some shout, others break rank. You're the officer in charge, and your phone buzzes. orders from above, disperse the crowd, use minimum force if required. But what you see is different. Elderly farmers, women, children. You know, one wrong step and this becomes a national headline. This is no longer a protest. It's a moral dilemma unfolding in real time. So how should a public servant respond? Not with panic, but with a plan. Let's apply the safety framework here step by step to resolve the issue ethically and wisely. The S stands for stakeholders, and the stakeholders here are the farmers, their families, the police on duty, civil society and the media, local residents and the wider public watching, reacting and remembering. Your response today will shape the memory for tomorrow. So be careful about identifying and including every single stakeholder on the scene. Now let's assess the situation. What's really going on? On the surface, a risk of stampede, escalation, violence, but deeper, it's a crisis of trust fueled by misinformation and growing alienation. This is not just a crowd problem, it's a communication failure with human consequences. Now let's frame it ethically. It's time to apply your ethical lens. Mahatma Gandhi said, means matter as much as ends. Bauman reminds us, in crowds, blurred responsibility must be resisted by moral clarity. Nussbaum insists empathy is not weakness, it's moral strength. So ask yourself, will your action respect human dignity or reduce citizens to a law and order problem? Now let's evaluate your options here. What are your choices here? Dialogue is one. Speak to protest leaders, clarify the rumor, de-escalate, pull back the riot gears, signal calm. Force, use only if lives are in danger, and even then with proportionality. And your writing answer, quote this: restraint is not weakness, it's wisdom in uniform. Now time to decide and justify. Now take an ethical stand. I'll give you a sample UPSC style closure here. I would prioritize dialogue and clarify facts using trusted intermediaries. Crowd control will be based on proportionality, not panic. In line with Gandhian principles and constitutional values, my goal would be peace with dignity. And in Aristotle's terms, it's phronesis, practical wisdom, not rigid protocol that must guide action in such moments. In crowd case studies, don't rush to use force. Don't hide behind orders. Show moral judgment, show ethical clarity, and back every action with one thing, a reason that serves the people. Now let's look at other case study, and this involves a festival gathering which turned to a tragedy. It's a day of major religious celebration. Thousands have gathered, barefoot, hopeful, chanting in unison. Spiritual energy fills the air. But so does something else, neglect. Barricades are poorly placed, emergency lanes are blocked, there is no public announcement system, no exit signage, just a crowd swelling by the hour. Then it happens. A child stumbles, people stop, then push, then panic. Someone screams, others follow, and within minutes there's a stampede. Lives are lost, mostly elderly, mostly women, mostly preventable. This wasn't a protest, it wasn't a provocation, it was poor planning. The question isn't who caused the stampede, the question is, did we fail in our duty of care? To answer that, let's apply the safety framework, because ethics doesn't begin at the barricade, it begins on drawing board. So let's tackle this case. Now who are the stakeholders here? Pilgrims and their families, local police and emergency responders, religious organizers, district administration, vulnerable groups, especially children and the elderly, and the silent stakeholder, the public memory. When tragedy strikes, the spotlight isn't just on what happened, but on who failed whom. Now let's assess. Was this a natural disaster? No, it was a human-made failure. Let's diagnose the layers. The first was overcrowding without exit planning. The next was no early warning system, and lastly, lack of coordination between civic, police and event authorities. The immediate cause was panic, but the root cause was negligence in planning. Now let's frame this issue from ethical lens. What are the values that went missing? First one is responsibility. Was anyone truly accountable for logistics? Second one, respect. Were the elderly given safe access? Third one is prevention. Did the system act before things go wrong? As Bauman reminds us, modern tragedies often come not from cruelty but from moral blindness. Similarly, Nussbaum suggests safety isn't just about survival, it's about protecting people's real freedom to walk, to pray, to gather without fear. Now let's evaluate our options. Now what should have been done here, or what must be done next? The options are: redesign the barricade system with flow-based planning, designate emergency lanes with GPS-tracked patrols, install crowd density sensors and live alert systems, include community leaders in the planning process, offer compensation, but more importantly, institutional learning. This is where ethics meets administration, not in slogans but in the systems. Now the last part, decide and justify. If I was writing an answer for this question or the case study, I will frame my decision and justify in this manner. And my words will be somewhat like this. As a district magistrate, I would audit the crowd plan ethically, redesign it for safety and inclusion, and ensure real-time monitoring and community involvement. Besides, crowd safety isn't just logistics, it's a moral duty. Because crowd safety isn't just a logistic goal, it's a moral responsibility. This tragedy didn't start with Stampede, it started with decisions made weeks earlier or not made at all. In public life, the absence of malice isn't enough. You need the presence of care. Because in governance, ethics isn't what you fix after a crisis, it's what you build to prevent one. Now let me give you some tips how to handle crowd-based case studies. You understood the dilemmas, you learned the ethical frameworks, you walked through the real case studies. But here's the final step. How do you turn all this into a top-notch UPSC answer? I'll give you 5 powerful tips here. Tip 1. Ethics first, not administration alone. Don't just say I'll follow protocol or I'll deploy force if needed. Instead, say something like this. While legality provides direction, ethical judgment gives decisions their moral strength. UPSC rewards thinking, not just checking boxes. Tip 2. Balance matters more than extremes. Never rush to coercion. Never surrender to chaos. Balance firmness with fairness. Discipline with dignity. Use phrases like restraint backed by readiness ensures legitimacy. Next, the most crucial tip. Learn to speak the language of ethics. Your vocabulary shows your thinking. Weave answers in terms like moral restraint, practical wisdom, public trust, constitutional values, institutional integrity. These signal that you're solving an ethical crisis, not just managing a crowd. Now the next step, use the safety framework naturally. Don't list it like a formula. Weave it like in a thought process. For example, you should write something like this. In assessing the situation, I identified vulnerable groups and possible escalation triggers. Writing like this shows maturity. This shows moral clarity. Now the final tip. When you're writing case studies, always end with reflective insight. Don't just close the case by saying problem solved. Close it with what it means to be a just officer. If I was writing your answer, I would conclude somewhat like this. A just state isn't the one that controls its crowds. It's the one that earns their trust. To conclude, in crowd cases, you're not just managing movement, you're managing meaning. Because crowds don't just test your plans, they test your principles. And when the pressure is high, it's your character, not your commanding attitude, that must lead. So long, happy learning.